George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
You think Joe Biden's bad? Wait till you see Kamala Harris. And Eid Mubarak to all the faithful Muslims in the world. It is Eid al-Adha, the sacrifice, unless you're in Palestine, in which case you are the one being sacrificed. In their Eid sandals, in their Eid dresses and little suits that they never got the chance to even wear out on the street, little children this evening are being massacred. At least 19 children have been killed today in the Eid by savage Israeli bombardment. And the British general election slides towards farce. A hung parliament becomes ever more likely as Labour's polling numbers continue to fall, partly eaten by the resurgent Reform Party led by the ubiquitous Nigel Farage. And in France, my equivalent, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has launched a program for government that will frighten the horses, but is attracting the French electors in record numbers. Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy night here on the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, if you saw the video I saw of Kamala Harris, for copyright reasons I'm not able to show it, you'd realize why the Democrats have stuck with Joe Biden. Even though he last night in the Hamptons, where else would he be? On stage with somebody I've never heard of, Jimmy somebody, and somebody I have heard of, President Barack Obama. They were taking a bow in front of an elevator sound rock band, and Joe just froze. He literally could not move. Not a muscle, not a Botoxed eyebrow. He had to be led off the stage like an embarrassing elder, an embarrassing senior, which is, of course, exactly what he is. Obama made no pretense about the power relationship between the two. It's well worth watching if you get the opportunity. Welcome to all those who are following the show on radio, KPFK, and to our worldwide audience who are uninterested in the kickoff between England and Serbia in the European Championships at 8 o'clock. At least watch the first hour of the show. Or tape record, as we used to say, the football and watch it later. Our numbers dived over the last couple of days because of this infernal European Championships. I hope people play catch up with the mother of all talk shows thereafter. The Kamala Harris saga is really something you need to focus on now. It is a commonplace that President Joe Biden has lost his marbles. It's not all he's losing in public, in his pants, on the most auspicious public occasions. But he's definitely lost his marbles. He's increasingly feeble, increasingly frozen in front of the arc lights, not so much like a rabbit caught in the headlights, but he is increasingly, embarrassingly out of touch. He does not know where he is or which buttons he's pushing. And that's important if you watch the communique of the G7 and the communique of the Swiss roll, the so-called Swiss peace conference over Ukraine and NATO against Russia, where actually Some of the most extraordinary statements have been made. One by the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, that no credible gathering such as this can take place without the presence of Russia. Rishi Sunak denounced Russia for not coming to the peace conference, forgetting that Russia was specifically not invited to the peace conference. But the highlight that caught my eye was Prime Minister Meloni. And I warned you in the last show about Le Pen. I warned you about the AFD. They're culture warriors. They're not real warriors. They have no intention of challenging the international status quo. And Meloni is the case in point. She actually said that if Russia does not accept the terms of the Swiss roll, we will have to force them to surrender. The Italian armed forces, of course, are mighty and with a great war record. That their tanks have 5 gears, 4 of them reverse gears, and 1 forward gear in case they're attacked from behind is only folklore. And Meloni is a great war leader. You can take a look at her there on the screen. The Russians must be quaking in their boots. I can't wait to hear Medvedev's reply. Putin is too statesmanlike to stoop to her level. But these 7 dwarves in the G7 have such a conceit of themselves. They don't seem to understand that any group which includes Canada as one of the top 7 economies in the world and excludes China, the biggest economy in the world, excludes Russia, excludes India. These people are living in a history book. They're living in a history book which is a talking history book, but which continues its talking points set in the 20th century and pretty early in the 20th century. The world that has moved on and now exists, the material reality that now exists, means this braggadocio, is that an Italian word? From Signora, is that how you say it? Meloni, just looks unhinged. Who is Italy to say they will force Russia to surrender? And of course, surrender they will not. They were, though, it is now proven, close to reaching a negotiated settlement with Ukraine hundreds of thousands of lives ago, hundreds of billions of dollars ago, hundreds of thousands of square miles of liberated territory ago. They had virtually resolved their differences in the talks in Istanbul, in which my colleague, the Honourable Craig Murray, standing for the Workers' Party in Blackburn, was actually in the room. He was there as a consultant to Erdogan's government in Istanbul. He's told me how close they were to reaching an agreement between Russia and Ukraine based on Ukraine's absolute neutrality, based on Ukraine eschewing the possibility forever of joining Joe Biden's nuclear-armed war machine, otherwise known as NATO. And when the document returned to Kiev, having been initialed, penciled, to be inked, the loathsome, reptilian, rhinoceros, Boris Johnson flew, presumably on American orders, all the way to Kiev to instruct little Zelensky, the cokehead, that he could not sign that agreement. And hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. Hundreds of billions of dollars of your taxes has been burned. And as I say, hundreds of thousands of square miles of Ukrainian territory is no longer even likely, even possibly, the subject of negotiation. These territories are gone forever. They will be part of Novorossiya, the new Russia, forever. And all those lives ain't coming back. And every day we see new gruesome footage of men being hunted down by Zelensky's recruiting sergeants and dragged off screaming and kicking to the front with only the most rudimentary training and arming. They are being led like lambs to the slaughter. And Joe Biden just whispers in their ear, there's another 60 billion coming your way. Donald Trump said today that Zelensky is the greatest salesman in history. Every time he comes to the United States, he leaves with $60 billion. And as soon as he gets home, he asks for another 60 billion. Now, of course, a lot of this is just payola. A lot of this is just pork barreling. They're not really sending all 60 billions to Zelensky. They're handing it to their own military-industrial complex to make more profits from the American taxpayer and kick back some of those profits to the American politicians that voted for the money in the first place. Nice work if you can get it. It is corruption on a grand scale. It is grand larceny of the public purse. But enough goes to Zelensky to keep him in coke and allow him to buy an ever-expanding portfolio of beachfront properties in some of the most attractive locations in the world. The loser is you, but the biggest loser is the ordinary public of Ukraine. As a very prominent Ukrainian journalist said today, the best way to end the war in 1 hour is to open Ukraine's borders, its western borders. Because if you do that, within 1 hour, all the men in Ukraine will leave the country. They don't want to die for Zelensky. They're far too well educated and civilized a people to want to do that. Speaking of sacrifice, let me turn to the Eid, which was celebrated by billions of Muslims today and tomorrow. There's two Eids. And the Eid that was celebrated today and tomorrow was the Eid al-Adha, which means sacrifice, commemorating the Abrahamic principle of the slaughtering of sacrificial animals. But the people being sacrificed in Palestine are not animals. They are women and children in unprecedented numbers. You probably thought there was a ceasefire, or at least one in the pipeline. You probably thought there was at least a ceasefire in the post. You probably thought that the Security Council resolution just last week, passed without opposition for a change, was the beginning of the end, but it's only the end of the beginning. It's only the end of the beginning of the chapter of Palestinian disaster, which began on October the 7th and 8th. It's not, of course, the beginning for the Palestinians because they've been suffering for over 100 years from the Balfour Declaration, which was signed in Cheetham Hill in Manchester in a building in which I spoke last night. That's right. I spoke last night in the building in Cheetham Hill in Manchester where the Balfour Declaration was signed. And very nearby is the street, and I saw the house in which the founding Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, used to live. He lived there, operated there. And Balfour himself had a constituency in Wythenshawe in Manchester, just 1 mile away from Ben-Gurion Street. And so Manchester, never mind Britain, Manchester is at the center of the entire catastrophe that has struck down Palestinians, stolen their lands, and allowed them to be ruthlessly repressed and scattered across the world. A little area of Manchester is at the centre of it. And what do you know? There are 7 Labour members of Parliament in Manchester who are members of the Labour Friends of Israel. Now, what first attracted these 7 dwarves to a country thousands of miles away, of only then 7 million citizens, on the shores of the Mediterranean? Why weren't they friends of, I don't know, Zimbabwe or friends of Thailand? What first attracted them to this so-called state of Israel? I'll tell you what. First of all, opportunism, because they already knew that the way to get on in the British Labour Party is to be a friend of Israel. But secondly, they realized there were many rewards to be reaped by being a friend of Israel rather than a friend of Zimbabwe. First of all, you'll be able to raise lots of money, and 1/3 of the members of the Labour front bench are funded by the Israel lobby. Secondly, you will be guaranteed the fairest of winds in the British media, print and broadcasting if you are a friend of Israel. I could say thirdly that you will never be allowed to be a minister in the Foreign Office with a responsibility for the Middle East unless you are a member of the Labour Friends of Israel. Prove me wrong on that. These benefits, friends with benefits, is what they are. The benefits accrued to them. Now, they're small beer compared to the American experience, where people who are not even legends in their own congressional districts pick up not just 6-figure sums from the AIPAC and associated lobby fundraising activities, but many of them, including people even I have never heard of, and I'm a political junkie, 7-figure sums. In the case of Joe Biden, 11.4 million donations from the Israel lobby. But back to Manchester and the 7 dwarves, the Labour MPs who are members of the Labour Friends of Israel. We know what first attracted them, but what continued to attract them, such that in the middle of a genocide and facing a general election, not one of them has resigned in protest at Netanyahu's mass murder of Palestinian women and children, even today on the Eid. These hypocrites are putting out tweets wishing Muslims Eid Mubarak while supporting an Israel that is massacring Palestinian children on the very day that they issued those tweets. And they think the people are fools. They think that the Muslims in Britain are going to return them to office anyway. Well, all the polling data now in front of us indicates that actually the number of people voting for the 2 main parties in Britain, the Conservatives and Labour, is going to be the lowest number since the Second World War. In the first general election, in which I was a fully conscious participant, 1970, in the hot summer of 1970, when Labour's Harold Wilson lost to the Conservatives' Ted Heath, 88.8% of the people of Britain voted either Conservative or Labour. That figure will now be well below 50%. The pollsters say it's because of the rise of smaller parties and independents. And so it is. And I happen to have the great privilege to be the leader of one of those smaller parties. Although last night in Manchester, as 20 of our Manchester candidates lined up on a table, not long enough, no matter how many tables they added, couldn't get all our candidates at it. Some had to sit in the extraordinarily packed, huge crowd who crammed into the building, that building that was once a house of such ill repute that the Palestinian disaster was authored within it. But I've only got time to talk about what's happening in Palestine today. The truth is, there's no ceasefire. And even if there was a pause in the ceasefire, the fire would quickly resume just as soon as the Israeli hostages were released. Netanyahu would continue the war in the north, continue the war in Gaza, continue the war in Jerusalem, continue the war in the West Bank. Because a scorpion stings because it's a scorpion. The massacres, the endless war, is because that's what Israel is, born in terrorist atrocity, against us, as well as against the Palestinian majority that lived there then. The scorpion stings because it can't help itself. Netanyahu murders because he can't help himself. With the side note that if he stops murdering, his own people will bring him down and he'll have to face general elections, which may very well end with him having to actually serve the prison sentence which he richly deserves. Right at this moment, there are hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Tel Aviv. They're not peaceniks. They're not people who want to provide justice for the Palestinians, but they sure as hell want Netanyahu out, and only a fool would be on the other side of that argument. We've got Arab Barghouthi, the son of Palestine's Nelson Mandela, Marwan Barghouthi, behind bars, yes, but in the hearts of every Palestinian. He is the real leader. Arab Barghouthi coming up right now. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Labour are still at that, by the way. As I think I told you, I persuaded the Tory Conservative Minister for Health to reopen the Rochdale maternity ward. Closed. The last baby born there was baby Archie in 2011. I persuaded the Conservative government to reopen the maternity ward. Labour has to match that, of course, except they've called it something different. They're not going to have a maternity ward for reasons which students of Labour recent history will already have worked out. It's going to be a birthing centre. Because, of course, it's not only women that give birth, is it? Well, is it? Here's our poll for tonight. Whose interests do politicians put first? Party or country? Yes or no? Party or country? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please subscribe to my channel and press the bell so that you're informed whenever I'm on air, whenever I'm broadcasting. And make sure that you share with all of your friends and contacts. Here are the telephone numbers. It's toll-free in the US and Canada. It's +1 844 944 3344, and it's free in the United Kingdom and Ireland, where the number is 08081 965522, and the international number 0044 203 966 2625. And a big welcome to KPFK listeners, 90.7 FM across Los Angeles and Southern California, which is a big area, which is a lot of people, and the show is going down a storm with them, I'm told. Arab Barghouthi is a Palestinian activist and commentator, and as I mentioned before this short break, is the son of Marwan Barghouthi, Palestine's Nelson Mandela. Arab Barghouthi, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Another Eid, that's 2 Eids under remorseless, savage bombardment. 75,000 tons of high explosive has been dropped on Gaza, a cage from which there's no escape, the equivalent of at least 3 atomic bombs dropped on a population with no means of defending themselves. The last Eid was celebrated, if that's the word, under shot and shell, and so is this one, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. I think that what you said basically tells the whole story. I think that we are witnessing one of the worst atrocities in front of our eyes, and it's being taped and live streamed on every social media. And I think that we got to a point where it's very obvious and very clear the international community's complicity in what's happening. Because if they wanted to take responsibility and to minimize the suffering of human beings, of civilians in the Gaza Strip, they would have done a better job at pressuring the Israelis. It's very obvious that the Israelis have a blank check by every major Western government to continue with what they're doing under the excuse that we want to eliminate Hamas. And we all know that the actual and real motive behind why Netanyahu is not stopping this is that it's very obvious that they have a plan to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. Because if you look at historical Palestine, you're going to find that there are 7 million Jewish Israelis and 7 million Palestinian Arabs. And I think that after all the ethnic cleansing and killing and imprisoning thousands and thousands of Palestinian people over 76 years, the fact that we're still 50% of this land, if not a little bit more, is driving the racist Israeli government crazy. And this is why they found that the only answer for this Palestinian problem, is to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people after, attempting to genocide the Gaza population and then opening the borders, and maybe a bunch of people will leave.
Now, this is an interesting dichotomy, because the media, when they report what's happening at all, and I'm sorry to tell you, there's less and less news on the so-called mainstream media about this. Most people in Britain probably think there's already a ceasefire in the conflict. But the dichotomy is this. Some try to suggest, some of the smarter papers, that the Western governments are not happy with Netanyahu, that Biden is frequently furious with him and frequently threatening him, and so on. But Netanyahu goes his own way regardless. And others, like yourself, believe that there's no conflict between these Western leaders and the Israeli government, that that's all for show, Kindly make your argument why it's the latter.
I think it's very obvious that, of course, there is some pressure, but the pressure is not for the right reasons. The pressure is because Biden is obviously seeing the fact that he's losing the elections because of his position in this genocide. And I think that if you look at other European countries, the only pressure that they put is that when they feel that something is going to impact them or affect them on either the country level or on the personal level. And that's the scene of politicians in the West that we're getting to know more and more. I think that if you really wanted to stop a genocide, you have all the tools to do it. You are the one who's, like the American government is the one who's giving them all the money, they're giving them all the weapons, they're giving them all the support, and then they criminalize the BDS movement, which tells you exactly who's controlling what's happening in American politics. But to be honest, George, I wanna also highlight something, which is the fact that everybody is talking about Netanyahu as if he's the only problem in the Israeli politics and Israeli society. Netanyahu is a really bad and a criminal leader, and we all know that. He's made clear genocidal statements, but at the same time, I think that this is a representation of what the Israeli society is becoming. And if you look at Ben Gvir and Smotrich and all these maniacs who are taking decisions and being in places of power in Israel, how they think and their statements, and it's all the Israeli, most of the Israeli politicians are supportive of this genocide, and they're also arming the settlers in the West Bank. I'm sure you're hearing about the settler terrorism that is at its peakest since the establishment of the Israeli state on the Palestinian land, and they are doing raids in the West Bank, in refugee camps. Last night they were in Ramallah here, in Tul Karim and Jenin all the time. They go to refugee camps, they kill people. 550 people have been killed in the West Bank since October the 7th. So I think this proves that Hamas is just an excuse that they use to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people.
The other pressure on Israel, apart from the mass movement on the streets, astounding photographs from the air just this evening of the demonstrations going on there, is the military losses which they are suffering in Gaza, indicating, given that they haven't released the vast majority of their hostages, they plainly haven't defeated the Palestinian resistance, because this weekend, I think they've lost at least 15 soldiers dead, and on the normal ratio of 3 wounded to dead. The Israeli society, historically at least, has not been able to put up with that level of casualty. So the resistance is still taking a big toll, isn't it?
It is, and I think this is just another proof of the fact that Netanyahu is continuing with this war and this genocide on the expense of not only the Palestinian people but also the Israelis. I think that any Israeli politician in their right mind, if they look at the long run, like Ishaq Rabin realized in the early 90s, that this what they call conflict will never be solved by military solutions. It will only be solved by political solutions. And I think that the Palestinian people have been ready and screaming for a two-state solution, which is by itself, as you know, is a huge compromise by the Palestinian people, because our land has been colonized, has been stolen. We will never change these facts. But the solution, we have to compromise because we want to move on. We want to establish our own state. We want our own independence. And I think that it's very important to remember that the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza are part of the Palestinian state that we're talking about. And the cost that is being paid, of course, on the Palestinian side is way higher and way steeper, but also Israelis will be paying for a very long time for this genocide, because I don't think that in anyone's memory we will forget this genocide for generations to come, not only in the Middle East and in the region, but all over the world. And the Israelis and their government will only be remembered by their crimes and by their killing. And I think that Netanyahu is the one who's responsible for that.
Now, I supported the Oslo Agreement because, as you know, I was close to President Arafat. He persuaded me that it was the best that could be achieved. But it's a complete failure, isn't it? I mean, you talk still about a Palestinian state, but where? The West Bank is now completely populated, paved over, concreted by almost 1 million settlers since the Oslo Agreement. Gaza is completely destroyed, will never be contiguous with the West Bank. Jerusalem has been, it's an awful word, I don't like to use it, but it has been Judaized. The people in Jerusalem have been ethnically cleansed out of it, and new settlers inserted in their place. Even the Greek patriarchy are having their property stolen. The Christians are being pushed out of Jerusalem. Where would this Palestinian state go if there was a two-state solution?
I mean, the only viable and realistic form of the Palestinian state will be on the 67 borders. And the 67 borders means that the Palestinian state will be established on the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And I think that not only the Palestinian people, but also Hamas itself and the leaders of Hamas have shown openness towards this solution. I think that it's very obvious and very clear, and anyone who disagrees with that, I think, is just blind or lies. The fact that Netanyahu is the biggest obstacle for the two-state solution, and I think that we're Palestinian. We have pride. We will never give up on our land, on our rights. And to be honest with you personally, if you go and talk to the young people, I think that, of course, they despise the Oslo Accords. They do think, rightfully so, that it was a huge failure. And I think that even though my father happens to be one of the people who worked for the Oslo to succeed and to happen, and he also met with Israelis to maintain the peace process, but of course he realized, like many other Palestinians, after Netanyahu came to power in the 96, that this is going to disappear as a hope. But to go back to it, to be honest, personally, I care about equality and freedom and living in dignity for the Palestinian people. I don't care about the format anymore. If we're talking about 1 state, 2 state, 10 states, I really don't care anymore. All I care about is that we Palestinians live in freedom and with dignity in our own native land. And I think this right, as my father said, we're not an exception. We're like any other nation. We deserve to live in freedom and independence. And I think we're going to get there. If we go to look at the details of what's happening in the West Bank and Gaza, we're never going to see a day with the Palestinian state. But if you look at South Africa, at Ireland, at Algeria, it happened out of a sudden. And I think this is the start of a new phase where Palestinians, we will have our own state as soon as possible.
Arab Barghouthi, thank you for joining us. Much obliged to you. Arab Barghouthi, Palestinian activist and commentator, and an all-round eloquent young man. Whose interests do politicians put first, party or country? 27,000 people have voted, and it's pretty overwhelming, but the numbers are also important. So let's get that poll over 30,000 votes. Let's take a quick break. And then, for the rest of the hour, the show is yours. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Now, you get that film and my earlier film, The Killings of Tony Blair, entirely free if you support me on Patreon. Support the work that we're doing. It's the most efficient way of doing it. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Once I get this election out of the way, I'll be able to pay more attention to direct communication with our patrons. I hope they'll bear with me over the next 18 days or so. Patreon.com/George Galloway. All of the funds go into supporting the media work that you are watching and I hope enjoying. Part of our media work is our podcast, which is still charting in over 100 countries around the world. I'm peculiarly proud about this next stat. We are #1 in Egypt, the greatest Arab country, the beating heart of the Arab world, the mother of all talk shows, is the #1 political podcast in Egypt. Now, you can download the podcast by scanning that QR code on the screen. Now, I had to ask yesterday a younger person what QR stood for. It stands for quick response, just in case you didn't know that. Matthew is on the line in Canada, in Ontario. Let's hear from him. Matthew, welcome.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm a big fan and you're a huge inspiration. I had a response to the sort of puzzle that you put out about, well, why do we have a Friends of Israel, but not like a Friends of Zimbabwe or Friends of Cyprus? I think it's kind of like a double-sided issue. I think that it serves two very important purposes to our Western empire managers around here. I think it allows the surface level politicians and the functionaries to sort of masquerade as being righteous, i.e. we support Israel, the continuous victim. While at the same time, I think it serves the plutocrats really well in that they hold this sort of deep set of values that is very well, funded, and they gain a lot from being able to exploit an incredibly weak group of people, which they've done many, many times. And I think that if you put those two things together, it like in my opinion at least, it really serves the establishment who they really believe this. Like they, down to the core, this is their, this is their belief. They've been holding it for a long time, and I just really don't see them letting it go easily. But they think they're on the right side of history. I believe that.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe I know them better than you, having sat amongst them in the British Parliament over 37 years on and off. I don't believe that most of these people believe in anything. I think it's entirely self-seeking. I think it is entirely opportunistic. And if you knew, as I do, might be different in Canada, if you knew, as I do, the kind of people that are in the Labour Friends of Israel, the reason they're not friends of Zimbabwe or Cyprus is because they couldn't give a damn about Zimbabwe or Cyprus, or for that matter, Israel. They are doing it for themselves. They're doing it for the reasons I gave. Opportunism in the Labour Party, certainly. You will not move up and move on if you're not a signed up friend of Israel. Number two, you can enjoy largesse in political campaigns, in well-funded 5-star trips back and forward to Israel. But perhaps the most important, you will be on the right side of the prevailing orthodoxy. And you will not be, as I am, remorselessly attacked for the stand that I have taken over 50 years with the Palestinians. Someone asked me last night what could have been different. I was in Wimslow Road, Curry Mile, in the centre of Manchester. There's a huge Eid celebration going on, and some youth, I think they were Somali youth, surrounded me, asked me a lot of good questions, clever questions. We had a good conversation. And in the course of it, they said, what could you have done that would have taken you to 10 Downing Street, taken you to political power in Britain? And I put it this way: if I'd picked Israel and India rather than Palestine and Pakistan, I might have gone far. And I think that even my worst enemies would be forced to concede that. But I could do no other. I could not have picked India and picked Israel. That would not have been true to myself, and I don't do things that are not true to myself. There may be some who are stricken with Holocaust guilt, but I doubt that, because they appear to have no guilt about so many other things that our country in particular has been involved in. I don't see them in the Friends of Ireland, when Britain and its occupation of Ireland and its genocide in the so-called famine, which was, of course, deliberately engineered, the idea that they have no conscience about Ireland, but have a conscience about the Holocaust and the mass oppression of Jews for centuries before the Holocaust, just doesn't square with me. Thanks, Matthew. Great call. Federico in London is up next. Go ahead, Federico.
Hello, George. Wishing you the best luck to have minimum of 60 of your candidates in the parliament. Yes. Ms. Sahra Wagenknecht is half Iranian, half German. Her name in Persian language means a field of wild flowers. What better name can you possibly have?
Beautiful. Nobody.
One other point.
She's my equivalent in Germany.
That's right. And unfortunately, I cannot see why only 6% of Germans support her, according to the statistics available, because
well, there's a lot of Germans, Federico. This is her first election. She got 6.1% of the vote. She got 6 MEPs. That will grow, but it's not a bad start in my view.
I am not criticizing it as a bad start. I'm just surprised that she hasn't got, a lot more rather than 6, maybe 30. But anyway, when somebody talks about world politics, particularly the leaders that 7 billion people on earth trust, and those 3 politicians are Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of Iran. And they call them names. They call them terrorists and not Democrats and nonsense like that. These people are more interested in democracy than Mr. X, Y, and Z in Europe.
Well, of course, the democracy that they are in favor of is inherently dispensable and is being dispensed with, and would, if necessary, be entirely dispensed with. That's what the rise of fascism in Germany, for example, was about. They could no longer afford democracy in Germany because the Communist Party was going to come to power there. So they had to support the rubbing out of democracy in Germany, and they openly assisted and supported the rise of Nazism in Germany. And there have been many other places that they have done that. In Chile, for example, Salvador Allende was the democratically elected president of Chile, and they murdered him and murdered 40,000 of his supporters. So the democracy that they talk about is infinitely flexible, first of all, and easily dispensable, and will be dispensed with if they consider that necessary. All that counts for them is that they remain in power. As long as the only guarantee in elections is that the working people will lose, they're happy to have elections. But if the working people showed signs, as they may do in France on the 30th of June, not long distant, with Mélenchon's program of a minimum wage of 1,600 euros, immediate recognition of a Palestinian state, the return to the status quo ante on the old age pension reforms that Macron introduced, so that French people will retire at 60, whilst the British people are retiring ever closer to 70. Big boost to public spending, freeze on energy prices, freeze on the prices of essentials, a freeze on rents, and so on. It's a bold and radical program that the Popular Front, led by Mélenchon, are putting forward to the French. Now that's democracy. Let's see if they allow it to come to pass. Federico, thanks. Great call. Susan Douglas says, it's important not to buy anything from Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, Chapters, Indigo, Chanel, L'Oreal, Estee Lauder, Unilever, Natasha Denona, Moracanole, Revlon, and Milani. Hope I pronounced all these brand names correctly. And Tata Shady says, ask not what you can do for your country, ask what your country can do for Israel. Joe Biden. Keith Mitchell says, not seen anything of you on the national media. All the desperate for power bunch seem to be getting the support. One wonders why that might be. Feared, I say, feared, afraid. All the best, a chance to, for me to throw to our party political broadcast, which is appearing on national television on all channels at times, which we'll show you on the screen now. I don't know if the director is able to show a clip from the party political broadcast. We'll show a clip later on. Here are the times. So it's on ITV Wales tonight in 1 minute. It's on BBC One England tomorrow at 5 minutes to 7. in the evening. It's on ITV England on Sunday the 23rd of June at 6:25 p.m. and it's on Channel 5 in the UK on Wednesday the 3rd of July, the eve of poll at 6 p.m. That's a good one. Let me go back to the lines where Ray in Wales wants to talk about Farage. Go ahead, Ray.
Hi, George. Good luck for the up-and-coming election. Now, Nigel Farage has never been an MP. He's tried and failed a number of times. So why is it the case that he's now come in...
7 times.
He's now come into the race, seemingly at the last moment, and he's stolen the media limelight. He's on the leader debates. He gets all the media attention, all the interviews, but you do not. Why? Explain it, because it's really, really bothering me.
Well, I've lost you. I don't know if others have lost you, and I see that I've frozen on the screen, but I'll keep talking anyway. Ray, I missed the last point. Can you say it again, Ray?
My question is, why has Farage come in at the last moment and stolen the limelight? He gets on leader debates, he gets media interviews, but you do not. And it's really bothering me why you're not being interviewed and given as much attention as he is, to even up the balance, as it were.
Yeah, of course, we have a ground game in the constituencies that none of the other parties can match. I mean, here in Rochdale, for example, with 18 days to go, I have not seen one single poster for any other party in this contest. Not one poster, not one banner, and not a single campaigner, not one from any other party. Whilst we have hundreds of people all over the constituency, we have thousands of posters and banners up. I mean, if you arrived from Mars, you'd think that we were the mainstream party here in Rochdale. And it's true also in Oldham East, it's true in Ashton-under-Lyne and many other places. We have a ground game that no one else can match. Question is, can that ground game outgun the national media coverage that you talk of? And you're quite right. He's not actually, Farage is not on the leaders' debate, though he's demanding that he should be, given the way the polls are going, and he can afford to go to court. We could not afford to go to court. Would have cost us £25,000 just to attempt an injunction on the television broadcasters who kept us off the leaders' debate, even though we were standing in enough constituencies and had enough elected members to warrant being on those leader debates. So Farage is not on the leader debate. He's in what I call the Seven Dwarfs debate. Seven also runs in the parties with second, third-rate Labour politicians like Angela Rayner, Penny Mordaunt for the Conservatives, an unknown person, not elected as far as I know, for the Liberal Democrats, Greens, Welsh nationalists. How is it possible that you keep me off these Seven Dwarf debates, but you put the Welsh nationalists on, who by definition are standing only in Wales, while we're standing all over the country? How is it possible, ditto, with the Scottish nationalists who are standing only in Scotland? We are competing for power in the UK. They're competing for power in principalities and regions of the UK, but we are the ones left off the debate. If we could have, we would have gone to court to try and force our way onto these. Farage coming back has definitely doubled the Reform vote. I predicted that it would, and it has already doubled the Reform vote. And I believe their rise will be greater still, and not just at the expense of the Conservatives, but also at the expense of Labour in formerly red wall, now blue wall constituencies from the Midlands up towards the north of England. And I'm already seeing that to some extent in my own constituency in the canvassing that we are doing. But you're right, Nigel Farage unsuccessfully stood for Parliament 7 times. I have been successfully elected to Parliament 7 times. There are 7 people on the debate, and I am not one of them. And with the caveats I made earlier about the Welsh and Scottish nationalists and so on, it is clearly a monstrous injustice. I think it's quite widely seen as such, but out of sight, out of mind will be the case for many in the country unless they've got a Workers' Party candidate standing in the election, in which case everybody already knows that we are in this race. Ray, thanks, great call. So after the break, I'm going to have our own Texas Rose. Yes, Rachel Blevins coming up after this. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So whose interest do politicians put first, party or country? You can vote on my Telegram channel, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. Get voting now. 28,146 of you have already voted. We've been blessed throughout the televised iteration of the mother of all talk shows with the eloquence of a young Texan woman. A young Texan woman of great perspicacity and eloquence. Her name is Rachel Blevins. You'll know what I'm talking about once you've seen her. Rachel, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I see your president and your vice president in public, which oddly they continue to do. If I was running Joe Biden's election campaign, I would not be putting him on platform after platform from which he either falls off, gets lost upon, can't find the exit from, has to be led from by other people as an increasingly geriatric patient. He's like a man in a sanatorium. I'm waiting for him turning up with his dressing gown and pajamas on. And then I see Kamala Harris, and she's even worse. What on earth is happening in the United States?
You know, that is an excellent question. And sometimes I look at it and go, oh, this is the president of the United States. This is the one who we are told is in charge. And, you know, it's funny because just a couple of weeks ago when we were looking at the headlines being driven by the trial that former President Trump was a part of, a lot of people were going, where is Biden? Why isn't he campaigning more? And then over the last 2 weeks, we've seen the really exact answer to that question, which, as we've seen, every time Joe Biden Biden is in public. I mean, he's having to be let off stage. He's freezing up. It's just embarrassing. And as you pointed out there, Kamala Harris is not much better. I mean, she was in Switzerland for this, well, we're calling it the Not Peace Summit that Zelensky is hosting there, because it obviously is not about peace in Ukraine. But she shows up there for a few hours, says a few words to Zelensky, and then she has the audacity to claim that the U.S. wants to see a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. After everything that the U.S. has done to Ukraine over the last 10, 11 years alone, and yet Kamala Harris is there claiming that we are the ones who want peace. The U.S. does not want to see just and lasting peace anywhere in this world, and I guess she didn't give us much more content, right, to talk about or to react to, because just as quickly as she showed up, she then also very quickly left and made it back to the United States, leaving National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan there to carry on with the summit. It tells you exactly what this summit is really about, but it also tells you about the state of the Biden administration, that Joe Biden himself is too busy at a, fancy Hollywood star-studded fundraiser here in the U.S., warning about the dangers of Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is too busy showing up there for a minute, and it's like, this is the administration that the United States is presenting to the rest of the world at this point.
I'm going to come back to Sullivan and Blinken and so on, because, of course, if Biden is not running America, then somebody else is. I'd like to drill down on that question. But the farce in Switzerland, I'm calling it the Swiss roll, the only person who got anything out of it was Zelensky. All the other leaders looked like they wished they were somewhere else. But we ended with the farce of the Italian Prime Minister, the famously warlike Italians, threatening Russia that they will force them to surrender. It makes you wonder if these people really believe what they're saying, or they're saying it for another purpose. Because, of course, neither all of NATO, and definitely not Italy, are in any position to impose anything on Russia at all.
Oh, absolutely. And wasn't Giorgia Meloni supposed to be presenting some kind of different platform? At least that's what I was told when she was running, but does not seem that way, especially when it comes to her policies, not just on Ukraine, but also on Palestine and her support for Israel. But yeah, I mean, you look at where NATO is right now, and I think you laid it out perfectly in your intro when you were talking about the G7 leaders. And it, at this point, is the loser's circle. You have all of these people like Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron that just lost royally with the EU parliamentary elections. You have them get together with Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden. I guess Giorgia Meloni is the only one who would consider herself a winner there. But for them to act like, at this point in 2024, that they have any chance of forcing Russia's hand, of forcing Russian troops anywhere at this point is just laughable. I mean, I guess they could say those things back in early 2022 when they acted as if the sanctions campaign that they were enacting against Russia was going to lead to some meaningful change, which it clearly has not. But at this point, when you have Russian President Putin just a few days ago coming out and saying, look, if you want to have actual peace talks, not whatever you're claiming is happening in Switzerland, here are our demands. It's very clear cut. It's saying, hey, we are open to talks, but this is what is required. And then you see the response from NATO, and it just makes me think they do not live in reality at this point, right? There's no way they can look at the battlefield in Ukraine and think to themselves, okay, we're just going to turn to some harsh words, or as the Biden administration attempted to do this week, we're just going to enact some more sanctions, as if they have anything else in Russia that they can sanction at this point. Now they've turned to trying to sanction third parties or other countries for working with Russia. And it's like, if you look at China, continuing to work with Russia was the smartest thing they could have done over the last couple of years. And that is exactly what they have done. And so I think when you look at the summit and you see Well, China's not there. You've even got Saudi Arabia's foreign minister who was dragged there. Now he's admitting without Russia here, there is no chance at peace. It's the most obvious logical statement, but yet it's the one that these NATO members and these G7 members specifically act as if they just can't see, and then they continue on in this direction while keeping Kiev on life support and acting like another 50 or 60 billion dollars is going to have a meaningful effect at this point.
Let's drill down, as I said I wanted to, on who is running the United States, if not Biden, who? Now, looking at that rock and roll show, although it was pretty ersatz rock and roll, the bits that I saw, doesn't really qualify as rock and roll. The man in charge looked to be Barack Obama. And I have the unpopular view that we are actually in the third Obama term, that he is the man actually governing America. But others think it's Blinken and Sullivan and people whose names are not that well known, at least on this side of the ocean. What's your take on that?
You know, I think at this point it almost seems like it's all of the above, because you have to ask yourself what differentiates Obama from Blinken, from, you know, anyone behind the curtain in some sort of a deep state scenario. They all seem to want the same thing. And so as we've seen with someone like Barack Obama, I mean, he came in as Mr. Hope and Change. He came in as I'm going to, you know, come in and end the wars. And then he turned around and he did the opposite. You've got someone like Donald Trump, who I know he's still a little bit more anti-establishment in some ways, but I still look at him and his foreign policy and remember that he is the one who has been just brazenly pro-Israel to the detriment of the Palestinians. He's the one who dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. And he's also the one who has carried on with this rhetoric while acting like, okay, maybe I'll come in and I'll change things, I'll end the conflict in Ukraine in 24 hours. But it's hard to believe it when you look at his time in office. Then you look at Joe Biden, and he's not even trying, right? He's not even trying to act as if he would do anything differently than what kind of the U.S. establishment, the military industrial complex as a whole, what their foreign policy has become, which is putting the United States in a position where we're rushing towards World War III. It's just kind of pick a lane. Do you want it to be against Russia, against China, against Iran? And it is incredibly disturbing to see, even in this election, right? We look at the third person on the ticket. Oh, it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. While he is getting some traction in polls, he also has been an out-and-out self-proclaimed Zionist, speaking very proudly about his support for Israel. And so I think when you look at the American people, you look at all of the students who have protested, the people who are waking up to the reality of U.S. foreign policy and saying, well, wait a second, I don't want my tax dollars to be spent funding a genocide on the other side of the world. They see the images and the videos of the Palestinian children being killed by Israel using American-made bombs. And then you look at the landscape for our upcoming election, the fact that we're supposed to have a presidential debate in just a couple of weeks, and you're like, oh, it's Trump versus Biden with RFK Jr. attempting to get on the stage. It does not spell anything good for the future of the United States at this point.
Indeed, the Kennedy's Middle East policy is a chamber of horrors, unspeakable horrors. He says things that even Netanyahu would be embarrassed to say, called the Palestinians the most coddled people in the world, for example, whilst a genocide was taking place. To me, that's only explicable by compromat, because Kennedy's other policies are radical and challenging. So today, for example, he says he will cut American military budgets by 50%. He'll cut them in half. Now, how that's possible to be as radical as that on such an issue as that, and simultaneously be more Likud than the Likud, more Netanyahu than Netanyahu, is very difficult to understand. but you say he's getting some traction in the polls. Tell us about that, will you? Because we don't see as many polls from the US as you do.
Yeah, I know a lot of the polls that come out pretty much have Trump and Biden neck and neck, right? They're going to be very close when it comes to their numbers. When they do factor in other third-party candidates like RFK Jr., like Jill Stein and Cornel West, typically Kennedy performs the best out of them. I know he's gotten around 10%, maybe even 12% in some recent polls. So there is some traction right now, unfortunately, and I do say unfortunately, because of some of his other policies. I think it would be good if he was actually on the debate stage challenging Trump and Biden. And unfortunately, because Biden has come in and completely rewritten the rules for the presidential debates, required them to only be held by CNN and ABC News, and for the threshold to be increased. Because of that, we are not likely to see an RFK Jr. on the debate stage, and it is much more likely to be, if this debate does happen at all, it's likely to be just Trump and Biden, and we are likely to sit there wondering how in the world we got into this scenario once again, because as we saw it, and I think that Biden coming out and claiming that, oh, we have a ceasefire deal, right? Just a couple of weeks ago, he acts as though this new three-phase plan is Israel's idea. Well, you look at Israel, they don't seem to have even heard of it, let alone come up with the plan or endorsed it. But the one line they follow is that Hamas has to accept this. It's all on Hamas. Don't worry about Israel. Well, Hamas comes out and says, hey, let's move forward with it, but we need to make some changes which are in line with everything that they've been saying this entire time. And then you look back to the Biden administration, and Blinken and Biden and all of them act as if, oh, well, Hamas rejected it. That's completely on them. And I think that that is almost the perfect picture of what we have seen from the Biden administration lately. They're never fully honest and accurate, and they are well aware of just how much you have voters in this country that typically would be Democratic-leaning voters that now will not vote for Biden because of his policy on Gaza. They're not going to vote for Trump or RFK. They are much more likely to just stay home in 2024 because they don't see a candidate really bringing any meaningful change on an issue that is incredibly important to them.
Dr. Jill Stein obviously harms the so-called Democrats. Whose vote is RFK's? Is he taking votes from Joe Biden, or is he taking them from Donald Trump too?
You know, that has been the biggest question, I think. I would argue he's taking them from both. Now, some may see it as a little bit more from Biden because obviously you have all of these, well, and maybe that would have been said before we saw an all-out genocide happening in Gaza that was funded by the US, right? Maybe if we go to pre-October, then the argument would have been, okay, he's taking votes from Biden in some places now that their policies are almost indistinguishable. And in a way, he's also taking a number of votes from Trump because this, you have RFK as someone who is calling out Ukraine, right? He's calling out a number of places where the U.S. establishment typically comes in and plays a role as Biden supports it. And so I do think that he's kind of pulling from them both. The biggest question is going to be how many people who typically would vote for Trump are not going to vote for him now, especially after seeing Trump on trial, after seeing this just ridiculous verdict that we saw in New York, where you had a case for falsifying business records that was turned into the Stormy Daniels hush money trial and blown up by the media and by the Democrats. A lot of Republicans and would-be Republicans who were considering voting for Trump, maybe they were kind of thinking, I won't go do it this year. But if they look at that trial, I would argue that they would be even more likely to go and to vote for him because they see the alternative as being a Joe Biden who is using all of these lawfare cases to go after his main political opponent. So I'm curious to see how many people actually vote for Kennedy versus how many say in these recent polls, oh yeah, sure, I'd vote for him, versus going out and actually doing it or deciding not to vote at all.
Very interesting. As always, Rachel Blevins, journalist, political commentator, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. So the poll is, whose interests do politicians put first, party or country? Get your vote in. You've got half an hour still to do so. I'll be right back with your calls right to the end. Stay tuned. Now, you're used to telephoning questions into me on my various shows. I've spoken with thousands of you over the last couple of decades. But now, on my new show, you get a chance to appear in person on a video wall. It would be good to see what you looked like as well as what you sounded like. It's very simple to get on my show. Go to www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Just register there. We'll get you on the television with me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Do watch my new show, Have It Out with Galloway. It's fun and it has a unique feature. It has a video wall. So instead of just calling me as you're doing now on the mother of all talk shows, you actually appear on the show. And if you want to sign up for that, then write to www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Now, let's go to your calls. Graham in Greenock. Go ahead, Graham.
Hi, George. Just like to say, well done. Hello.
Thanks. Thank you. Go ahead.
Just well done and getting Rochdale, and wish you all the best for not only your own constituency but others who are working hard to get into Parliament, and I hope you win many seats. It would be good to get a voice, and I'm very angry and annoyed at not being on any of the chat shows or any of the shows such as Question Time, where all the other parties seem to be getting a platform, but they won't. They're not letting yourself or any of your party members on.
No, that's it. Well, I think everyone. Yeah, it would, Graham. Everybody who knows me knows why they're not letting me on, because in a field of 7 dwarfs, there wouldn't be many, if any, of them left standing by the end of it. Because if I can do one thing, it's debate. If I can do one thing, it is win arguments. And therefore, they've decided to scrub off a little bit of the lipstick called democracy and just outright censor me. But these mainstream shows, chat shows and so on, it's really important always to remember this, Graham, are watched by exponentially fewer people than this show, the mother of all talk shows. For example, our last week audience was 3.4 million for the week for the mother of all talk shows. Question Time that you mentioned has an audience of 200,000. So there's a vastly bigger audience on social media. I mean, I did a tweet earlier today of my wife and children celebrating the Eid. They're out of the country for a couple of days and celebrating Eid with my wife's family. It has about 500,000 views. 500,000 in not even 10 hours. So our reach is vast, and it's important to remember that and not to pay too much respect to the so-called mainstream media. Graham, back to you. Last point.
Yes, I would just like to say that I like the way you've spoken of the two parties, that the two cheeks of one backside, and I'm calling Keir Starmer the Tin Man, because Keir Hardie would turn in his grave if he knew what the Labour Party had turned out just now. I think it's diabolical, to be quite honest with you.
Absolutely. Diabolical. The Tin Man, I called him that myself. Sometimes I call him so wooden that the birds are trying to nest in him. Other times I call him the Tin Man, needing a bit of oil to make him less clanky. But one thing I think you and I would both agree, there's never been a Labour leader as bad as this, both in terms of the quality of his politics, but also the performance as leader of the opposition. He's, if he is, going to be the leader of the biggest party purely because he's not Rishi Sunak, purely because Labour are not the Conservatives. That's the only reason. Nobody is supporting them because they love them. Let's go to Canada again, where Karen has a point of view. Let's hear it, Karen.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, clearly. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you for having me, and happy Father's Day. I would imagine it's Father's Day there too, right?
It is, although I haven't seen any of my 6 children on Father's Day because I'm at the front, I'm at the war, I'm away at the war in this election, and they are scattered. So it's not been a great Father's Day for me in that regard.
Oh, well, I'm sure they'll email you or something. Well, I'll take it from
you get a perfunctory text.
I'll give you a happy Father's Day from me. Anyway, I had an idea.
Thanks, Karen.
I don't know about the legality of it, and you probably maybe thought of it yourself. You know your wee Workers' Party pins? I would pay $20 for one of those. Can you sell them internationally? That would help.
It's a deal.
Your cost.
Yeah, that's a deal. That's a deal. We can sell merchandise anywhere. We just can't accept electoral donations from anyone who isn't on the British electoral register. But if you go on to our website, you can definitely order not just these pins, which are lovely, but I noticed one of our candidates, Bilal in Rusholme, he's made a couple of stunning videos, one on Ben Gurion and the Balfour Declaration, and a second one yesterday on Emmeline Pankhurst, the great women's crusader who led the fight for the right for women to vote. And in it, he's sporting a hoodie which is so cool, it's achingly cool. So all these things can be ordered from anyone, anywhere in the world. And I think they are super fashionable. God bless you, Karen. Thanks for the Father's Day greetings, which has certainly lifted my spirits in that department. Thank you. David Cole says, today I had a leaflet through my door for Adnan Shabir, the Workers' Party candidate for Slough. Just to let you know, I will be voting for him on the 4th of July. Thank you, David, for that. Daniel Joliffe says, I saw that Labour post smearing your name, telling people to avoid voting for you. They're scared of you, George. Daniel, it's worse than that. It wasn't a Labour post. And I can't go too deeply into this because we have a secret recording of the Hope Not Hate meeting in Rochdale before they set off to deliver the post that you have just referred to. It finishes them legally in terms of their charitable status. It finishes them in terms of the election expense limit, which is on them as a so-called third party campaign, non-party, not allowed to advocate for any party, but you're allowed to advocate against a party. Imagine. But the spending limit on it is small, £700. And we have evidence that they have bust that probably to the power of 10. We have them on tape, including the leader of the so-called Hope Not Hate. But we also have them on tape explicitly stating that they are working with Labour. They are sharing campaigners with Labour and that they want Labour in Rochdale, which is illegal. And quite quite apart from election expenses, libel, they are banter rights, they are bust. And a major British newspaper is about to blow this show altogether, and so I better not say much more than that. But it's a smear campaign organised by the Israel lobby in Britain. Hope Not Hate is a part of the Israel lobby. Its money comes from Israel's biggest financial supporters in Britain. Two of its directors are bigwigs, office bearers in the Labour Friends of Israel. There's no pretense about this. This is Israeli interference in a British general election. Not just at me, but also at Farage, Nigel Farage. They're targeting him also. Although it may be that by the time our story is published and the ramifications of it are considered by the authorities, that their campaigns will be ordered to cease and desist. Thank you, though. GRJ, George, watch Joe Biden's eyes in the clip. He doesn't blink for ages. He doesn't blink in many of his interviews. He's a very strange chap. You never said a truer word. On line one, Kevin in Suffolk on right-wing politics. I'm all ears, Kevin. What would you like to say?
George, I haven't spoken to you since you were elected, and I had 2 heart operations. So, well, congratulations, and I hope you get re-elected.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you're better.
I'm feeling a lot better. It wasn't open heart, George. I had atrial fibrillation. I had a couple of procedures, so thank you very much anyway. What I wanted to say, so we've spoken before. I think what is going on in the West is, and I don't want to kind of overstate this, but it terrifies me, really, because I think what they're trying to do is foment a war or foment at least a crisis to prevent Trump being elected. And I think it is all to do with the criminal wrongdoing that's been going on in the Democrat Party, and they are terrified of a judgment day with regard to that. And I think that's what's going on. But the tendrils go all across the West. And I think, I mean, I was saying to your screener, you know, I don't want to overstate this, but in the Nazi resistance in the occupied countries in the war, you had monarchists and old-style conservatives and social democrats and communists who came together to fight the common enemy. And I think we're in such a serious situation that kind of people of goodwill have got to try and bury their differences to actually address what is going on. And part of it is getting people kind of on the left who should know better to actually have the courage to call out, like, they've got it wrong. And, like, you know, this kind of woke thing may have started from, like, good intentions. I really don't know. But, you know, it's got to be faced down. And, like, I mean, the question was, right, so you were speaking earlier about the AfD in Germany, which I know kind of nothing about, and Marine Le Pen, and also Farage. And my problems with Farage are his Thatcherite economics, which I don't, you know, was a disaster. But there are people of goodwill, and in my mind, like Andrew Bridgen is one of the heroes of the last Parliament. So, you know, the question is, are there people you could work with on the right? And more specifically...
yeah, I'll work with anyone. I'll work with anyone for good and with no one for bad. So I worked with Farage and his then party, the Brexit Party. I worked with them to win the referendum, to actually Brexit, and to stop those who were trying to wreck Brexit. I believe that was for good, and I worked happily with them to do that. But the Thatcherite economics is the least of the differences that we have with Farage, although that is a considerable difference. We're socialists. he's a Thatcherite. So that's a big gulf, but it's the least of it. Nigel Farage is gung-ho for Netanyahu and the slaughter and murder and maiming of 150,000 people in Gaza. It's not easy to bridge that gap. Nigel Farage is supporting Ukraine. He's supporting NATO in Ukraine. I don't understand that, because his mate, Trump, is about as tepid on that front as it's possible to be. So if people like Nigel Farage were prepared to even take the line of Trump about Zelensky, about Ukraine, about NATO and the danger of World War III, of course we would work with them on that. But of course it takes two to tango. So what we do is be very clear with people. We are now big. We're not big in the sense of Labour and the Conservatives, but the Workers' Party of Britain is now firmly established on the British political scene, and we've only existed for 4 years. We are a household name in millions of households. Our branding, our style of work, and the political line that we take is well established now in Britain, as the elections, I'm sure, are going to show. And where our point of view coincides with the point of view of others to the right of us, then of course we are ready to cooperate in pursuit of good. Right and wrong is more important to us than right and left. We don't actually even consider ourselves to be left. We are socialists. Left nowadays means liberalism, means wokeism, means license and abandonment of traditional values. For example, in Rochdale, the Labour Council is supporting financially something called Junior Pride this month, in which they are opening a Junior Pride to 10-year-olds to 18. And one of the aspects of this Junior Pride will be drag shows, drag queens, scantily clad, presumably, with men's tackle in women's underwear. We don't think 10-year-olds should be exposed to that. Least of all at the public's expense. Least of all at the Rochdale taxpayers' expense. We're not against drag queens if you are of that ilk and you're an adult and you've got the money to pay for it yourself from your own funds. Go with your drag queens. Just don't frighten the children or frighten the horses. But don't expose 10-year-olds to it. That's not right. I don't mean to sound like a troglodyte, like a Luddite, or like, dare I say, a conservative. But it's not right to expose 10-year-olds to that kind of thing, in our view. Now, most people on the left will already be gnashing their teeth at what I have just said, rending their garments, screaming abuse at me, calling me a nist and a nob. But that's our point of view. We want to protect our children. We want to protect our country and its legitimate interests. We want to protect the family. We believe that men are men and women are women. We believe that only women have a cervix. We believe that only men have a penis. We believe that babies are born in maternity wards to women. We don't believe in people who birth, people who breastfeed. We believe in mothers who breastfeed, mothers who give birth. You get my drift? I know that you do, Kevin. But that's what differentiates our socialism from what passes as leftism in many, maybe even most other parts of the left. But on economics, on foreign policy, on trade union rights, on democratic rights, on civil liberty of people in our country, we are rock solid. We are as hard as steel. We are men and women of steel, as will be found out in the course, I hope, of the next few years. Kevin, great call. Thanks for it. Simon, the legend, has got some breaking updates on, amongst other things, Kamala Harris. Can't wait. Simon in Florida, welcome.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. There have indeed been many, many developments, not least including the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. And for those who didn't have the pleasure of watching the many hours of speeches at the Swiss Peace Conference, she, I believe, was the third speaker. And she, as part of her speech, along with throwing out the usual phrase, unprovoked invasion, that did get a slight chortle from the audience, she explained that her raison d'etre, her reason for existence, along with that of President Biden, was to, quote, preserve the rules-based international order. And indeed, that phrase was riddled throughout the text of the G7 leaders' communique from Italy, which is an exceptionally long document. It took me 3 tries to actually finish reading it, which is very unusual for me. It's clearly the intended 12-month agenda for the entire world, but they forgot to completely mention in any respect whatsoever Central and Latin America. They did, however, mention China no less than 27 times. And that was obviously noted with some degree of alacrity by the Chinese media and their government. But in addition to that, this week, we had, following on from the shining example of Mr. Sunak, when he announced to the Ukrainian Rada that Britain had now entered into a 100-year alliance with Ukraine. You'll remember me discussing that and how Grant Shapps had repeated that in one of his identities at Lancaster House at least twice. Well, now Biden has signed the US-Ukraine bilateral agreement, and what's unusual about that is it has the implementation annexes attached on the currently publicly available version, and there's some quite shocking information in that. If people would like to read the US-Ukraine bilateral security agreement, they should focus on Article 2, the last paragraph of Annex 1, Part A, the 4th paragraph of Part B. And then Part D is very shocking because it talks about how 2 years into the conflict, from some people's starting point, 10 years from other, how it might actually be important for the Americans to track where their weapons are going, because it seems that some of them mysteriously are turning up after being donated to Ukraine in conflict zones in Africa and with the drug cartels in Mexico. So they're literally going full circle to the southern border of the United States, whence upon President Trump, that Michelle Blevins possibly forgot to mention, is declaring that he's going to deport 15 to 16 million people. And in the resulting chaos on the Mexican-American border, he also wants to declare war against the cartels, who are now fully tooled up with American weapons by Ukraine. And this, as President of Serbia, Mr. Vučić, has just announced on Swiss television in the Die Woche, their weekly main news program, kind of like a panorama type program, that we're now 3 to 4 months away from World War III, and he's terribly worried that neither European leaders nor the electorate are considering what it'd be like when 5, 10 or 15 million European men have died
Oh, hang on, you're on the wrong.
Incredible, incredible. Thank you, Simon, as always, for your erudition and brevity. Let's go to line 2. Victor is in London on Labour and Palestine. Go ahead, Victor.
Good evening, George. Pleasure to speak to you again. We've not spoken since your annual general meeting last year. It surprises me.
Okay. A lot's changed since then, yeah?
Indeed, indeed. Hopefully for the better. The canvassing results seem to suggest they're going to get better. And I noticed Keir Stormtrooper, though he claims you have to vote for him to get the Tories out, seems to be more preoccupied with stopping you and the Workers' Party getting in than the Tories getting back in.
Yeah, that's true.
However, that wasn't quite what I had on my mind. Though what I have on my mind does connect rather well with that subject. It amazes me that it has taken so long for many people, particularly some of our recent supporters in the Muslim community, to actually understand that the Blairite Labour in name only party is Islamophobic and supports Zionist atrocities against Muslims. I say that because there is nothing that the Zionist Israeli government is doing to the Muslims in Palestine that our Labour in name only Blairite government did when it was last in power to Muslims in Iraq or Afghanistan. Blow up Muslims, kill them, it did that. Blow up children, it did that. Blow up their hospitals, it did that. Blow up their schools, it did that. Suggest and insinuate they're all terrorists. We had Tony Blair speeches on our TV telling us that he is fighting a chain of terrorism that starts out there but leads to the streets of London, which is dog whistle language for you've got to kill the Muslims while they're still kids before they come to Britain and become terrorists. In fact, when it comes
Victor,
to everything else...
Victor, that's... no, I need to stop you. I need to stop you, but not because it's not a great call. It is an outstanding call. Best call of the night, in my view, with all respect to the others. But just that time is running, and I've got to go to Gayatri for a social media roundup. But let me say that the point you made was brilliant and brilliantly expressed and is too oft forgotten. It was Labour that invaded Afghanistan. It was Labour that invaded and occupied Iraq. It was Labour that embarked with George W. Bush on the so-called war on terror. It was Labour that was co-complicit in Guantanamo, in Bagram Air Base, in Guantanamo Bay, in Abu Ghraib prison. It was Labour that was co-complicit in extraordinary rendition, black prisons, flying people with hoods over their heads and chains across their limbs to they knew not where, without any legal pretense whatsoever, to be tortured in black prisons. It was Labour that did all this, not the Tories. So when you hear them say that they are, well, the lesser of two evils, when you hear them say that we have got to keep the Tories out, remember that it was Labour that did all of that. And if Labour had been in power during this genocide, it would have been Labour who was doing it all over again. It is Labour that is the bigger threat to the British public. It's certainly Labour that has betrayed Britain's Muslims more than any other party even dreamt of doing. So frankly, anybody who's celebrating Eid today but planning to vote for Keir Starmer in the general election, there is no hope for you. Victor, don't be a stranger. Come back soon. Whose interest do politicians put first? 29,109 people have voted. I'm just short of my 30,000 votes. Please get your vote in the next few minutes, because I've got to go. Alas, far away to my true love, my good wife Gayatri, who is overseas. What's rattling, Gayatri?
That was an excellent call from Victor and a precise summary from your part that Labour is not just complicit in this genocide, but has been complicit and has had blood on its hand for decades now. So I just wanted to start off by wishing all the Muslim audience a happy Eid al-Adha, and to you, my dear, a happy Father's Day from all your 6 children, of course. The poll asked, whose interests do politicians put first, party or country? Elise Tack says, you mean the parties they are throwing in their country houses after pocketing their money bags? This is quite the most unanimous poll that we've had, like 99% party, but actually more specifically themselves. The way Norse Renegade puts it, actually they put their own interests first, but usually they coincide with the party corruption. The way Odysseia puts it is number 1, me, number 2, me, number 3, my mini-me. Or the way Moon puts it, themselves, the party. So this is the general response towards the poll on all platforms. 80 Snow says, even Starmer said that Davos comes before Parliament. You need to do the poll again with a foreign interest slot in the poll. And finally on the poll,
very good point.
Folk Art Fidelity puts it very nicely. He says, the current crop are self-interested enough to bring us to the very brink of thermonuclear Armageddon, with a side dish of genocide. Unless, of course, we're talking about the Workers' Party and George Galloway, where the moral integrity and truth-telling are front and center. Thank you for that.
Most kind and much appreciated. What was the reaction to, if there was one, to Arab Barghouti's statement that he doesn't care if it's 1 state, 2 states, or 10 states? The struggle has moved on to being a demand for the Palestinians to live an equal life in whatever form it is. I thought that was quite new ground coming from him. What did you think?
It was very new ground coming from him, and it was a bit shocking to hear the son of Marwan Barghouthi, of course, our hero, the actual Palestinian leader, to hear him say that. This is how severe it has come to the state of the Palestinians being massacred in Gaza, first of all, but also not having any dignified life in West Jerusalem and the other parts where they live under Israel occupation. So on that point,
well, if you look at go on.
So we had an email coming in from an Australian journalist. He goes under the name West Wolf. He says, "Greeting, George. I hope your preparation for your electorate and party in general is proceeding well. I implore you, sir, do not let the dream of a Palestinian state, for which so much has been sacrificed, go quietly into the night, as the Biden, Sunaks, and Ursula von der Crazies of the world would have it do out of political convenience. I am not naive. I realize there's only so much one man can do, but in my time following your career, George, I have seen you pull the improbable and practically impossible. So please, good sir, anything that can be done to keep the dream of Palestinian statehood in the light, and let it be done."
No, as long as God gives me breath, I'll never give up. I promised that 50 years ago, and I'm not going to break that promise now. But it's definitely true that there must be a sense of exhaustion, a sense of dissipation, amongst the people who have suffered so much. And Arab Barghouthi is not the only one who's said that. I've heard even supporters of Hamas say that they no longer really care about states. Their demand has, if you like, reduced, or perhaps it's not reduced, perhaps it's expanded to a demand for normality, for being a citizen in whatever state form there is, in that they can live a dignified life. And that's the phrase you just used. And I wanted to ask you this. All over the world, Muslims are either sacrificing animals or are eating sacrificed animals in the Qurbani, in the Eid al-Adha. And yet how stark is the contrast that in the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, it is the Palestinians who are being sacrificed. And I just wondered how that juxtaposition looks in the wider Muslim world. Does anyone see the irony of that, for example? I mean, there will be people who've got full tummies now, God bless them all, from their Eid dinner, but the Palestinians are the dinner in Gaza. I saw a little girl with her Eid sandals that she never got to wear because she was murdered in the early hours of this morning. That her parents had bought her a dress, had bought her sandals, and she is wearing them in her mass grave right now, never having had the chance to wear them on the Eid.
Of course, people see that juxtaposition, and myself, for example, I have since October have not been able to share pictures of food, us enjoying dining. It's a terrible thought of sharing that or showing that off, knowing that in Palestine they are suffering. My aunt showed me just an hour ago videos of the Indonesian Hercules dropping down food parcels, aid from Indonesia, and how that had to be the way, as we saw previously, how undignified it is to throw food down like that, the dire state they're in right now. And obviously, as it is the sacrifice fest for Muslims, surely you can be sure that most of the money and charity money spent is towards Palestine.
Thank you. Sorry to have upset you. I upset myself. Sorry I can't take you for chips after the show. Look after the kids. Give them a kiss for me, please. And I'll see you all soon. Last call of the evening from Maureen in Texas on RFK. Very interesting indeed. Maureen, go ahead, please. You're the last caller. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, George. I wanted to add to the conversation with Alaska's Rachel Blevins about RFK and what we see here locally in the United States. It's my opinion from both mainstream and alternative media coverage that RFK will be taking votes likely from both parties, probably slightly more from the Democrats. And I think that's most likely why they're going to keep him from the debates and that they're both working against him. But I personally, like you, was very excited early in his campaign, but when he revealed his feelings of Israel-Palestine, and if I was prior to October 7th, his opinions are disgusting and repulsive, and he lost my support forever, and I plan to vote for Dr. Jill Stein.
Well, you and me both, Maureen, and for exactly the same reason. I know Dr. Jill. I know her to be a fine person, a dignified person. If she were the President of the United States, your country's position in the world would be wholly transformed. I, of course, recognize that she's unlikely to be elected president, but I think we've reached the stage in human history where we have to speak up and stand up and vote for what we know and believe to be the right thing. And the era of voting for the lesser of two evils must be over, because evil always wins, and because it's increasingly difficult to know which is the lesser of two evils. Which is the lesser of two evils in Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, for example? I'm unable to agree with any liberal that says that Trump is the greater evil. I don't actually believe that. I'm not prepared to entertain that thesis. But of course, I could not vote for Trump. I'll not be happy if Trump is elected in November as President of the United States, but I'll be very happy, ecstatically happy, that Joe Biden isn't. As to RFK, you're quite right. I was excited by his run. I'm excited by his pledge today to cut US military spending in half, by 50%. But his position on Israel-Palestine is so monstrous. It is obscene. It is demonic. He transforms into a demon when talking about that subject, that I could not possibly say a good word about him, which for me, who grew up as a child with his uncle's picture on my wall next to the Pope, who loved his uncle, who loved his father, and was ready to love him. What a bitter, bitter disappointment it all is. Maureen in Texas, thank you for that final call. Thank you to the 29,627 people who voted in our poll. Overwhelming, as Gayatri said, that politicians put their party first, except when they're putting themselves first. And they put their country last, as 29,000 of you have said almost all the time. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And you can see my Have It Out with Galloway tomorrow night, or Tuesday night rather, and I'll be celebrating Eid all over again here in Rochdale tomorrow. But I'll be back on Wednesday with the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.